across the animal industry right now as far as cares and concerns, and I'd just like to talk about a few of those just from a USDA perspective. As you know, we're in Iowa right now, and Iowa is part of the Midwest that is suffering from some of the effects of a long, hard winter, flooding that has impacted the eastern side of Iowa as well as Nebraska, and I don't think we're done seeing effects of flooding as it spreads up into the Dakotas, and maybe even the Yellowstone River is above flood stage in Montana right now. And so USDA, I have had the opportunity to travel on behalf of the Secretary to see some of the impacts in my home state of Nebraska. And you know, the flooding impacts that you see on the internet and that you see in social media are accurate. It's very devastating. You know, where you see today the Elkhorn River, I think, is at a 4-foot level, which is probably a little bit elevated, but maybe close to normal. At one time it was 24.5 feet at flood stage, and so think about how that spreads out in what is a part of Nebraska that is fairly flat to start out with. You know, as you move across Nebraska, though, the impacts I think that other states in the Midwest and the upper Midwest especially have felt with you know, long-term snow cover that has required additional feed resources, repeated bouts of long-term cold that has made it challenging for the mama cows just to maintain weight, as well as the pressure that's put on feedlot cattle. I think we've seen a several-month convergence of items that have made beef production especially hard. And so as you look at some of the programs that we've been talking about to provide flood relief, USDA has opened the window of opportunity for county committees to look at that long-term compound effect for the livestock indemnity program for producers that maybe have felt the impact of the polar vortex or just the mud that many producers are dealing with, as well as opportunities to look over a larger window than the one that's initially provided under the livestock indemnity program, which I think will be useful to some of the producers, especially cow-calf producers across the upper Midwest. You know, the Farm Bill is, we're working very hard to get that implemented at USDA as well right now. One of the things that your organization probably has been most interested in as we've gone through that is the new three-legged stool that we talked about, and we worked with Congress from a technical assistance perspective at APHIS to take a look at how do we take different components that we've used for years with, you know, border surveillance, working with producer organizations and industry groups to see how we continue to increase biosecurity and awareness about how producers can help be a part of protecting themselves, as well as partnering with USDA to keep pests and diseases out of the U.S. with our laboratory network that many states struggle to have the resources to not only maintain accreditation, but also have enough diagnostic ability available in the event that we did have an animal disease outbreak. With a new concept that was part of the discussion very in the forefront with a vaccine bank. And so Congress allocated some upfront money as well as some authority for us to work within those three areas of emphasis to be able to figure out how we divide up and prioritize those monies to have impact not only for the pork and beef industry, which I think drove that debate around the vaccine bank, but also look at other species, especially especially the poultry industry that struggles from time to time with disease outbreaks as well, to have a balanced approach that everybody can benefit from. And so part of what we're in the process of doing right now at USDA as we work to implement those Farm Bill provisions is we need to hear from the industry. And so we've had many different sectors come into the office, even groups within those sectors come in to talk to us about what they see as priorities for the investment of those dollars. And Dr. Scheer and his team are busy taking a look at if we were going to start looking at a vaccine bank, which vaccines would we have in that? Would we want to include some poultry vaccines as well? And then if we're thinking merely about foot and mouth disease, there's 24 strains plus or minus out there at any given time floating around. Do we want to, which ones would we concentrate on? Do we want to assume that it'll be an accidental introduction or a terroristic introduction, which makes a difference on what strains you think might be important? So, and then how do we invest in something that might have a 5-year shelf life so that maybe there's a way to rotate that stockpile and get value out of it on both ends through its effective life, and then as it's getting down to its expiration date, is there a way we can cycle that out to recoup some of our investment to be able to reuse down the road? And so we're having those discussions right now. If any of you have special insights, I'm sure Dr. Scheer would love to hear those, but very much the door is open to that discussion right now, and would love to hear from you. Obviously, as we talk about a vaccine bank, probably the disease that is of most top of mind concern right now is something that there isn't a vaccine for, and that's African swine fever. And the pork industry is very much concerned about African swine fever. If you look at the numbers, I think the pork industry had their economists put together some numbers based on anecdotal as well as eyewitness reports from people that have traveled in and out of China since August. They believe that the impact on China's pork production could be as much as 50%. And so as you start looking at that for a country that is by far the majority of the protein source as far as red meat or meat is concerned for their population, that has significant opportunities to be disruptive within their food supply, as well as disruptive as far as world trade goes and how product moves around the world. And so I think we also should not underestimate how that might play into as we move forward in trade agreements and negotiating trade agreements of how that might inspire countries to move forward with us and be able to open up and reestablish normalizing trade, not only with China, but within that region as well. And so we're going to continue to redouble our efforts at the border to protect the U.S. industry. I think there's a couple things that play there. One is we're working very closely with the swine industry. I probably talk to one of the leaders in the swine industry at least once a week, if not more often. Here a few weeks ago, probably a month now it's been, we invited them in, take a look at all the concerns that you hear in popular media, in the industry media, as well as producer-to-producer conversations, because it seemed like the same issues that we thought we had talked about keep resurfacing as issues of concern. And so we sat down with them. I think they brought in a list of 12 concerns by the time we were done adding on the ones that we had heard at different times. We talked about 17 different items of concern, whether that be feed and feed additive, animal movement, people movement, what's going on at the border, beagles and how we might be able to enhance that. we came out with a list of 4 or 5 different things that we were going to do immediately, which included putting 60 more beagles at the border for CBP to use as surveillance of passenger as well as cargo traffic. But we also talked about some things that you hear about a lot, like feed additives, and whether or not do we have testing protocols that are accurate and reliable. Is this a real threat? And does the industry, can they shut down the movement of feed and feed additives and still be able to maintain high quality diets? And that was an area that we landed that we probably don't have enough reason to cause shutdown there, and the impact on the industry, the negative impact may be more harmful than any perceived gain that we would get through taking action there right now. But we agreed to continue looking at science, continue analyzing, and figuring out where we not only moved on that issue, but many other issues as well. And so I think that that is something that's been a positive. We've also increased our conversations with Customs and Bureau Protection as we move forward. And we have increased the level of activity with our C group, and what that group is within APHIS is that the group of inspectors that go around to ethnic markets and grocery stores, and they look at the mix of products that are in those, and they're trying to identify prohibited products that are making it some way into the United States even though they're prohibited. And as part of that, we've been able to continue to identify. That's an active group that works all the time, but we've increased maybe our focus a little bit on products that might be of concern coming from China. And so when you saw the $1 million seizure in New Jersey a few weeks ago, that was a result of us identifying importers that we thought might be circumventing the system and asking CBP to tag those importers and take a look at some of their shipments. Now, while that made a big media splash, in reality it was probably about 38,000 pounds of pork-related products that were of concern, very much still prohibited, but they were like bouillon and noodle bowls that while it was still prohibited, it's been processed, and probably the virus has been attenuated and wasn't of real concern. It was candied pork that also had gone through a processing process that probably wasn't of concern, but nonetheless is prohibited, and so we want to lock down on that. And we're going to continue to work in partnership with CBP. We're going to continue to do everything we can in cooperation with the industry to protect the pork industry. I think the last thing that I want to leave you with on that subject, though, is that the same epidemiology that we have relied on and used to protect ourselves from China with their endemic foot and mouth disease and their endemic classical swine fever is the same protocols that we're continue to rely on to keep African swine fever out. And we can point to a long record, over a century, of being able to use those programs and our vigilance at the border to protect ourselves from foot and mouth disease and many other diseases. And so I think that shows that the system has the opportunity to work, and hopefully with redoubling our efforts, we put more confidence into that as well. There are some parallels out there, though, that where the industry does have some levels of concern. You know, high-path avian influenza marched across the Midwest very rapidly a few years ago, but I think that gave the poultry industry an opportunity to question its biosecurity protocols, the way they move feed in and products out of those poultry operations, and I think we've seen them take measures to try to address that. I think we've also, as PEDV moved across across the Midwest a few years ago, the pork industry had the opportunity to take a look at some of those protocols that were in place and question whether or not they had sufficient biosecurity in place there. But I also think that we're not completely there domestically, because the last few summers we've had Seneca Valley virus that has continued to show up at our packing plants and cause disruptions at different times, some of it longer term, some of it more short term. But Seneca Valley virus presents itself like a foot and mouth disease. And the fact that those hogs are showing up at slaughter facilities presenting those clinical signs tells us that not everybody is making the right decision and calling the vet at the right time when they load those hogs up, or else they shouldn't be presenting themselves in the numbers that they have been in the past. So I think I want to challenge the leaders in this room, the veterinarians, the state veterinarians, the industry people in this room, to, there's things we need to continue to challenge our producers to do the right thing, to not only protect themselves, but to protect their industry. And, maybe we've seen Seneca Valley so many times we think we know what it is, but I'm not sure that's the right decision we should be making in this day and age with the fear that we have about African swine fever out there. And so I think we need to continue to challenge each other as we move forward. We also are working very closely, and I'm going to attend a symposium here in a few weeks in Canada to work with our North American partners to make sure that we're not only talking about African swine fever and making sure that all three nations are vigilant and work together in communicating, but there's also some other diseases that we can make progress on, and pests. On the southern border, cattle fever tick is an area that we want to be able to work together with Mexico to be able to address maybe some new tactics on both sides of the border to be able to continue to have an effective program in the U.S. that doesn't face pressure from Mexico all the time. So we want to work there as well. I think that we also want to make some progress. I think we have good progress going on between us and Canada with movement of cattle, but I think we can do some things to electronically share data between the U.S. and Mexico to enhance that movement of animals there. And I've set some kind of aggressive goals for us at USDA to try to move forward with that electronic transfer that hopefully within the year, if not soon thereafter, we figured out how we can help facilitate that exchange of electronic data. And once that's in place, we could have a system where the information and the traceability we have on Mexican cattle might exceed the traceability we have within our domestic herd. And so I think that should redouble our drive and desire to be able to keep up with international countries within our domestic herd as well. And so maybe just a last couple of things to talk about before I jump into the beef side of it a little bit. As we look at other industries outside the animal industry and see what is going on in the fruit and vegetable industry and what some of the large retail chains are saying to us in that space, we have some of the very largest retailers telling the fruit and vegetable growers all over the world that they want traceability within the system here very soon, within 12 months. And that includes blockchain capability in some cases where they want to be able to use blockchain to trace that. Now, whether or not blockchain is the end-all answer, it's one that they've identified right now as a tool that they want to explore and try to use to manage that system. But I think that if they're successful within the produce industry of driving that forward, I think it's very likely that the meat industry is the next place that they're going to look to want to have traceability and demand traceability for products that are going to move into their retail outlets. And so that's another reason why I think that talk about traceability is getting more and more serious to the industry, and we're going to see those segments of the industry and those marketing systems that can embrace that traceability be able to be more successful in some of those retail chains that are expecting and going to be insisting that traceability. I think we're doing some great things in the state of Kansas, and Chelsea's here. LMA has been a great partner with their cattle trace project where they've done